Hi everyone. I'm Beulah, as Seven says. I'm here to talk about the themes and the curatorial approaches that influenced TULCA 2025. Um, Today's talk, I'm hoping to keep it quite informal, so feel free to kind of move around or ask questions or go to the bathroom or whatever you wish to do. I'm going to sit down. Um, I think there's a typo in my bio. I'm not a lecturer. I actually program a lecture series at Glasgow School of Art. If I was a lecturer, I'd be better at public speaking, but I'm not. Um, so I think this talk will last for about an hour. And then there will be some time for Q&A towards the end. So, right? Perfect. Um, okay. Yeah, so I'm very glad to be here. Thank you so much, Gavin, and to the ATU for inviting me, and to also Galway's broader art community as well. So I've been welcomed in Galway in the past as an artist. I've been supported by the arts community here and some of the organizations here in my artistic practice. So it feels really lovely to have been invited in this, invited to curate TULCA. Um, so yeah, I guess starting from there, I've been thinking that invitation is kind of the base or the place to start. So the process of invitation is really baked into the TULCA format. So each year, the TULCA team and the TULCA board invite a curator, and then that curator invites people, or that curator takes part in an open call process, but also then invites artists to take part in the program. Um, so I guess starting with this sort of thinking around invitation and entry as a starting point for the program. Um, this, just to zoom in a bit, this is an image. This is one of the graphics that you might see in the background of all the TULCA graphics, and this was designed by Corb from Pure Designs, who is the designer for TULCA. So when we wanted to think about how to convey the ideas that might ground the festival, we were mostly thinking about sort of conveying encounter and movement across place and proximity. So this graphic was something Porrick suggested. This is a snippet of a larger picture of Galway's waterways. And this is quite fitting because when I was thinking of how to approach the festival, and when I think about Galway, where it's been situated, I usually think about the city's presence by the water. So that includes the city's or the county's history as a sort of, or the city, sorry, the city's history as a sort of trading port. Also thinking about Bob Quinn, who is a filmmaker and writer who has all of these ideas about Ireland's cultural history. So not just rooting Ireland's culture and sort of wider Celtic culture, but also in its exchanges with the Mediterranean, with the Arab world, through like Shana singing, through weaving, through types of boats and through types of mythology. So I guess thinking along these lines, I was also kind of considering the discourses that had been happening over the last year as I was planning the festival. So there are a lot of these discussions and historical ties that have emerged in order to explain the cross-border solidarity between Ireland and Palestine. And then in this moment, there's also this broader conversation about migration. And there's a really awful, as we all know, anti-migrant rhetoric rooted in, I guess, fascistic thinking that's happening throughout Europe and in Ireland as well. So there's all of this discourse about who is allowed to enter a place, what can one do when they're in the place, what type of entry is legal. And I guess combining all of these themes together and considering them in the context of Ireland and how it configures itself as a nation. So of course it's this island nation, so that means it's quite vulnerable. It's quite a small nation with the colonial history, but it is also positioned between these two huge superpowers, the US and the UK. It's quite autonomous and quite powerful, and there's a bit of paradox there. Um, so I guess while considering the approach to the festival along these lines, this is where we began. So if you saw the open call, you would have seen this image. So I think I came across this image sometime last year. So this is a medieval Burmese map of the world. It's an ancient map, so it predicts the world as the cartographer saw it. So it is Burma. And it's such a beautiful image. You can kind of see it's like a teardrop shaped landmass. And at the very bottom, all of these islands are kind of falling away from the mainland, but not in a chaotic way. They're still sort of remaining as part of their entire island structure. You can kind of see the outline of where they used to be. And you can see these little boats traversing those islands too. So the interesting thing I thought about this image was where it shows up online, there's not really an author, or sorry, an illustrator attributed to it, but it kind of always has the same caption. So the caption for the image goes something along the lines of, the Himalayas are shown by a horizontal green line. So that's the line that we see. It's kind of zoomed in here. Above is the magical land of seven lakes and Ninth Maru, and below is where strangers come from. So I guess within this map, what it tells us about what the people who drew it think is that to know the world is to expect a certain type of strangeness. And then that encounter with strangeness is not only inevitable, it's also very vital it's a vital part of being in the world. So I guess using this map as a starting point and thinking about mapping generally as a kind of paradox where you have these colonial maps that depict sort of domination and surveillance and enclosement. You also have these really beautiful ancient maps that are art objects, and they have a whole other function, which is kind of allowing you to bring things that are further away closer to the eye, or sort of encamp things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. So what resulted from this using this map as a starting point was an open call process and an invitation process for the festival that was answered by various artists who were interested in all of these themes, such as modes of discovery, modes of encounter, specifically across geographies and rooted in specific cultures and histories. Um, and that is kind of that's where a lot of the work finds itself. Much of it focuses on the friction that happens when relationships are built or when people encounter difference. And then much of it also focuses on the generative nature of those encounters as well. So a lot of the artists are part of collaborative duos or collectives. Luckily this year we're working with, I think, about 25 artists, which is quite a lot. And a lot of those artists are based here in Ireland, but some are based in other parts of the world. So I just want to flag, but there's lots of different languages used, so I'm going to try my best to pronounce everything well. So just to go through some of the artists and some of the work that you can expect. As I said, a lot of the work kind of engages with many different geographies. So this is a still from a film called Mirror States. I believe this is an image or a statue of James Connolly, and he's kind of standing, or the statue is kind of facing a sort of busy motorway in Dublin, or a busy street in Dublin. And I believe it faces like a fly fit gym or something like that. So this work, Mirror States, is by an artist called Caroline McCowell. It's a 2-channel video installation, so it will show in the Heinzville Day. And it's configured such that there's the 2 channels sort of face each other, and it puts the 2 countries, Ireland and Cuba, in mirrored relation. And the film itself draws on these political connections and the mutual inspiration between the 2 countries during the early 20th century. So this is maybe history that might feel a bit lost, but in the early 20th century, Ireland was considered the Cuba of the West because they had so much in common in terms of aiming to realize their socialist dreams. So Caroline, the artist, while in Cuba in 2022, had noticed that a lot of, Cuba had realized its own revolutionary dreams. And what had resulted is that a lot of its revolutionary heroes had these statues and posters that stood on grand plazas and all over the city. Whereas in Dublin, a lot of the revolutionary heroes are kind of hidden away like this on side streets and appear to be forgotten. So Caroline started shooting images on their phone while in Cuba, and then a year later started filming footage in Dublin. So they position these two bits of footage together, and they've interwoven them with some of their internet searches, memes, found footage, and it kind of moves associatively through all of this material that reveals these unexpected links between the 2 countries. The work also kind of picks up on some easy spraydishness that's also happening nearby. Like it touches quite a lot on Shannon Airport and the US outpost there, as well as Guantanamo Bay, which is another US outpost in Cuba. And there's something really useful about putting these two films or configuring these films as they've done. I think there's something there that kind of disrupts this linear narrative when thinking about history or thinking about the past as things that have passed and things that have happened, rather than an association of settled events that kind of continue and might appear hidden in the present. Um, So this is work by Marie Farrington. And Marie's work also kind of captures what can happen at the point of encounter with a landscape or a type of architecture. So over the last year, Marie has been showing a multi-platform project called Diagonal Acts. And it's appeared through a few iterations. It's shown in Tumble Bar Galleries and Studios. It's shown at the Docks in County Leitrim. And we're really lucky to show it here for TULCA as well. So each iteration of Diagonal Acts responds to the specific site in which the work is located. So for TULCA, Marie's work will be located in the James Mitchell Geology Museum, which is in the university here in Galway. So Diagonal Acts builds on this idea of theatre/archaeology, which is an academic idea that links together performance and excavation, because they're two practices that rely very heavily on memory and fragments and assembly. So the project uses the idea of the diagonal line as both a physical and a symbolic way of thinking about crossing between boundaries and crossing between contexts. So you can see here in the picture that the work Marie has made is a series of archaeological items. Some are made from wax, some are made from glass, and I think some are made from stone as well. And all of these works respond really beautifully to what exists already in the museum, which is lots of valuable rocks and fossils and minerals. And I don't know if many of you have been to the museum. It's possible that you have, but if you've been, you can see about the museum itself carries a very visible colonial legacy. Like it's a very traditional Victorian cabinet of curiosities type of museum. And it feels to me very much like a museum that you'd see a film or some sort of set. And the work that Marie has made are these kind of objects that are in some ways real, but also act as props. So they kind of cross that line between tools and art objects. And it kind of allows us to think about how we might lean into and across different contexts, as well as disciplines and different types of histories as well. So continue the thinking around encounter. A lot of the work in the festival also engages with encounters with territories or borders. So this work here is from Shared Migrant Archive, which is a participatory project by Beulah Ezeugo and Nessa Finnegan. So this project responds from the exclusion of migrants from the Common Travel Area, which sits between the north and the south of the country. So a lot of migrants cannot actually freely access both sides of the border and the services and the workplaces and the social spaces that are across the border from which they're located. So in this project, Beulah and Nessa collect stories of crossings. So it kind of acts as a counter mapping exercise. So a lot of what they collect, they use these vintage maps that represent or I guess convey Ireland's own colonial history. And they try to link them with this contemporary regime of exclusion for migrants here. So rather than collecting digital data, like border systems might, they collect information on how the border might feel, and they collect stories of crossing that might be invisible or visible or legal. And participants in the project kind of share how the borders feels to them, how they sense its presence, and that kind of highlights their own embodied experience of crossing, which takes it away from that sort of legal experience that we hear about. And Beulah and Nessa will show this work in Galway Arts Centre, and they'll be there in person on the 8th of September to activate it, so they'll kind of feed into the archive. Participants are invited to also feed into the archive, and all of it will be incorporated and it will continue on as a living project beyond TULCA. So the festival also features a new commission from the artist Meyer Hughes. And this commission kind of centers on border dwelling, or that sort of um, mul- um, kind of dwelling in this ambiguous place when you're a person of multiple heritage. So Meyer Hughes is an artist from Wales. They have a Welsh and English heritage, so they've got a dual identity, and they also live on the border as well. And they examine, like I said, they examine what it feels like to live within that ambiguity. So for TULCA, Meyer took on a 3-day expedition across Offa's Dyke, which is the former location of the England and Wales border. So this slate roof tent that you see in the picture became part of the work. Along the way, they also collected some signs. They did some interviews with other collaborators. They took some photographs. Um, and now the exhibition in the Heinz Gallery will feature some of the work that they collected, including a new playful tent structure, which is similar to this, but kind of focuses on folk architecture and Welsh mythology. Meyer has also invited some artists as well to be part of TULCA, which is really beautiful. Yeah, it was very lovely to invite them and then have them kind of extend the net and bring other people in. So they've invited Emily Joy and Dara Shawar, who are also Welsh artists with dual identities. And they're also thinking, they've made work that kind of thinks about this hybrid folk tradition of dwelling along a border. Gonna skip ahead. Um, So these are two textile pieces by the artist Jess Samora Turner, which also shows in the Heinz building and also kind of follows the same, or is concerned with the same sort of encounter. So Jess is a British and Chilean artist and a grower, and Jess lives on the border between Poland and Germany. So her work explores emotional and ecological connections and patchworking as a way to bring together unexpected histories and unexpected materials. So this textile here is called the Three Sisters. So this is a hand quilted sculpture, and within the sculpture, within it, you can see that it's kind of stuffed with wool, but it's also stuffed with seeds. So that's heirloom corn, beans, and squash seeds. And it's kind of named after this method of planting that indigenous communities in North America would use, where they plant all of these seeds together and they grow together and they intertwine, and that way they kind of reinforce each other. Um, and they yield better plants than they would if they were grown separately. So the seeds are kind of embedded in the salvage fabric that Joss has found, and it kind of references the survival and ancestral memory of displaced communities in America. And then the second artwork here, it's quite a large scale quilt, and this is called Pisagua Blanket. So Pisagua is a village in northern Chile. It's quite a remote village, and in the past, it's functioned as almost like a concentration camp. So during the Pacific War and during Pinochet's dictatorship in Chile, a lot of people were trapped and tortured and imprisoned in Pisagua, including the artist's grandfather. So in 1973, her grandfather was trapped in Pisagua and then exiled to Europe for almost a decade. So Jess has made this quilt, and it kind of speaks to that sort of like soft work that we undertake when we're aiming to repair our relationships with the land. That work that's kind of cautious and patient and labored and often collective, and often happens in spite of what, I guess, state histories might want us to remember. Oh, I'm gonna just go back a little. Um, So this is an image of work called tilt shift or shift tilt, and it also kind of engages with that idea of these encounters with landscapes. So this is by Abel Shaw. This is quite a zoomed in image, and it will show in the Galway Arts Centre as well as the Zoology Museum in the university. So Abel Shaw, the artists, are a duo who explore authorship, communication, and power in their work. So their practice kind of unfolds through dialogue and translation and collaboration with each other, but also with the people who encounter their work as well. So there are two works that they're showing, and both of which are in relation to each other, and they kind of form a network of exchange between them. Um, So this work here features, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a sort of image of a volcano, there's this egg sculpture, and then there's an image of a chameleon, and both of the works have quite similar figures between them. There is an embossed print, which is the work that we'll show in the Zoology Museum, and that incorporates sand, which was collected by one of the artist's mother from a beach near Campania, which is where her grandmother is from. And this is a gesture that obviously grounds the work in kind of care and inheritance and material connections, but it also draws connections to the landscape. So in Campania or around Naples, there are two volcanoes, I think Etna and Vesuvius. I'm looking at Sophia because she's helped me with my Italian geography. So what they wanted to capture was that feeling of living by a volcano, that sort of like beautiful attachment to this landscape that's almost like a deity and represents fertility, but also represents a type of precariousness and a type of danger and a fear. Um, so they're kind of suggesting that meaning, like the earth in itself, is always unstable and is always shifting and is always alive through these two artworks. Just to go forward a little bit. So, as well as thinking about that situation encounter with the landscape, a lot of the work present also considers these encounters between human people and cultures, and it kind of attempts to capture the narratives that form either personal narrative or state narratives that arise when people are in close contact. So, I wanted to show you a little clip by the artist Chris Chong Chen Yuan. And Chris, in their work, they explore collective memory. They work through films that connect different geographies and cultural stories across time. And they work with a kind of DIY or punk filmmaking ethos, which means that they kind of recombine visual and sonic materials from lots of different genres and lots of different mediums together to kind of form something new. And this film has a really beautiful soundtrack. It's free jazz on a trumpet piano, or on a trumpet and some piano. And it'll show in the art center, but I think there is a little bit of the soundtrack within this clip, which is really lovely. So the film is really beautiful. It follows these two exiled individuals who are preparing to be reincarnated, and they're kind of walking through this nondescript forest. And between them, they're sharing these intimate stories of their families, of their love lives, of their heritage, and a lot of the stories that they share is rooted in these Chinese, West African, and Caribbean folklore. So these themes of like queerness and migration and colonial legacy kind of are woven together and they emerge within the film itself. And it's just a really brilliant portrayal of how state memory and personal embodied memories actually can merge and influence one another. Sort of along the same theme, Thais Muniz, who is a Brazilian Irish artist, will be showing work here at the ATU library. So Taisha's work comes from the similar desire to explore inheritance and linked colonial legacies. So here in ATU, Thais will be showing this beautiful textile called Radical Imagination, which sits within her wider project, New Atlantic Triangulations. So for this presentation, Thais transforms the library building, which is 5-story and made of beautiful oak, with this kind of kite-shaped textile work. and it celebrates play and imagination and renewal. It's a really rich and deeply layered work that links degrowth theory with Celtic cosmology as well as Bantu and Congo cosmology. I won't share too much because Thais is also on the program for the artist talk, so she had here joining us from Brazil on the 18th of November. So a lot of the work featured also speaks to the idea of otherness or marginality. I guess how those margins are delineated, what are the knowledge systems, the economies, and the modes of being that are presented in the center of a place, and what lies outside, what is exiled or excluded. So in the Heinz building, there will be a new work by Sean O'Riordan, who is an artist from Galway. And in Sean's work, they explore the politics of desire, value, and consumption. So they focus on coins, plaques, and tokens like these. And much of it is inspired by signage that would grant access to hidden or marginal spaces like queer backhouses or nightclubs or fairgrounds. So in this new work, they have mixed these kind of ambiguous segments, ambiguous symbols with fragmented language, and they've created these textiles that kind of lead you around the structure. They say things like nobody's home, open, outside, and they kind of disrupt your clarity as you encounter the work. So I guess it touches on this idea that the benefit of kind of looking in from the margins is this ability to recognize these inherited structures of power that exist, and to see them from an outside perspective, which means that you can kind of see what lies beyond them, which is usually like capital, the pursuit of profit. And within Sean's work, they do that important work of showing that being positioned on the margins is also a position that allows you to kind of undo the logics that might set you in place, to imagine or build new structures of your own. I think a work that relates very well to Sean's is this film showing by the artist Kate Morrell. So this is called E El Barro se hizo eterno, and the mud became eternal. This film kind of brings a new perspective to the conversations that we have here in Europe about repatriation. And it kind of questions these Western approaches that we have that separate sort of museum objects from their actual living context that might give them meaning. So the film is set in Colombia and explores how colonial histories and indigenous knowledge systems can intertwine. So it uses these portraits of women, Bogotan women, and their private collections of pre-Columbian ceramics. So the heart of the film explores this concept called guaquera, which is the practice of looting archaeological sites and graves, and it kind of acts as this sort of political resistance against the nationalist systems that seek to loot these objects themselves and then place them in a museum. So it allows people to preserve their own cultural property by collecting them themselves and keeping them in circulation. This is another still from the film. It says, all the playthings were broken to see if there was gold inside. And this is a quote from one of the women who was interviewed by Kate. So the film for TULCA has been made accessible through these descriptive subtitles. But what is really interesting is how the knowledge within the film is also a little bit encrypted itself. So the practice of guaquera is actually illegal. So a lot of the women in the film don't show their faces. And the artist also doesn't translate everything that they say. So there are these partial translations used throughout, and that is done in order to give them a sense of privacy and also a sense of power as well. And yeah, the screening will mark the first showing of this film here outside of the UK, so it feels very special to have been able to include it in the program. So again, thinking along those same lines of I guess marginality and mapping, the festival also kind of borrows a bit more from cartography and map making processes and thinks about this active reorientation, which is just a way to kind of turn again or redraw a map or unsettle a form. So this here is an image of the artist Saoirse Amira Anais. So Saoirse worked from a Black feminist perspective. They explore what it means to defy the boundaries of their own otherness and the freedom that comes with shaping their sense of self. So Saoirse will share the film Sympathy, symphony, sorry, for fraying body at Galway Art Centre. So you can kind of see that they're dressed as this figure called the creature. So within the film, the creature kind of moves between the human and the non-human. It travels through the land and the water before joyfully returning into the sea. And the soundtrack of the film is focused on, or it's inspired by this kind of ganwa, which is a type of Moroccan spiritual music, as well as Celtic music traditions, which mark two sides of Saoirse's heritage. So alongside the film, there's also a live performance, which is really exciting. So Saoirse will appear as the creature and will lead a procession across or along the river. And the performance will blend movement and spoken word and sound and ritual. I think that's on the 13th of November. So that'll be the afternoon mid festival. Um, this is another work called The Yellow Flag by the artist Tom O'Dea. So Tom O'Dea is an artist whose practice explores the political implications of knowledge production. So how different forms of knowledge shape our ways of knowing and being in the world. So for TULCA, Tom is presenting the Yellow Archive, which is a sort of speculative archive of the Dog Liberation Organization, which is this fictional militant group that's devoted to creating a new social order of species, equality, and coexistence through the liberation of dogs and other species from human control. Um, yeah, this is a really interesting work. It's also one that's still ongoing. So Tom is making this evolving archive of imagined dog liberation struggles from the early 20th century. So he's made this beautiful material that documents the DLO's activities or the speculative DLO's activities in Galway, the state's response, and there are other archival fragments within that kind of depict acts of solidarity by other animals, such as like cows gathering in Ayr Square to defend the dogs and occupying space and engaging in civil disobedience. And there's some films that go along with the archive, and the taxis and the film scripts are drawn from Eileen Miles, Donna Haraway, John Berger, and Tom will also be another artist who's part of the talk program. So they'll be able to introduce all of the research behind this work. I think that will be on the 11th of November. And I think the archive is particularly interesting because it allows us to think about what is possible when we move away from these kind of human-centric modes of being, which is really important thematically. Next is Caoimhán Gaffney's work, and Caoimhán also works in the realm of speculation as well. So within their work, they create these kind of imagined worlds that explore alternative futures. So this work shown here is called As You Leave the Rest of Yourself Behind, which is, you can kind of see a performer curling at the foot of a dune in this image. So a lot of the works chosen for TULCA this year are chosen because they reflect our presence and our impact on the earth. I think Caoimhán's work was really special because there's a kind of like quiet humor that emerges where they do a lot of imagining of these futures where nature lives or transforms and engulfs humanity, and they poke fun at those of us who are kind of unwilling to embrace more interdependent ways of being. So a big part of the festival and the open call process was embracing collectivity and collaboration. So there is an invitation put out to artists who work as part of duos or artists who work cross borders. Um, and that is because it felt thematically relevant, but also the motivation was to kind of enable the type of work that aligns with themes present in the festival, sorry. So, or enable the type of exchange and proximity and intimacy that the festival was hoping to champion. So this is another really beautiful film that I feel very lucky to be showing. So this was first seen at the Glasgow Short Film Festival, or I first saw it there, and immediately it struck me as something to show as part of TULCA. So this film is by Morad Benamour, who is a filmmaker based in Tunisia, and it's made through a dialogue with his cousin, Fairouz Gamam. So the project began when Morad contacted his cousin and shared that he wanted to make films as a way to see the world. And his cousin, who lived in Belgium at the time, talked him through the process and assisted him in making this really, really beautiful film. So it follows him as he moves through his home or through the courtyard and the farm surrounding his home. And he shares space with all of these beautiful animals that he owns. So some of them are his own pets and some of them are strays. And he tends to all of them throughout the film. And often he climbs on top of the roof with his animals and he kind of looks at this railway beyond his house. Um, and the film is very interesting because I think it's a really, yeah, it kind of portrays time in a very compelling way. So there's a sort of uneven rhythm to it. Like it's very slow at points, and at other times it's very quick. Like it's quite erratic. Um, and it kind of, I think it introduces a sense of longing for this place that's really far away. It's very speculative and dreamy, and it's very aspirational. And you kind of get the sense of the like stagnation and constraint that Murad has as he like waits to encounter his cousin again. Um, Another really beautiful collaborative project that has happened through this year's festival is a collection of ocean waves. So this is an audio work by the artists Keita Shea and Enya Moore, both of whom are Irish artists living in Australia. So this project is yeah, it's an audio work, so it features sound and spoken word, and it revisits this newspaper called The Wild Goose, a collection of ocean waves. So this is a newspaper from 1867, and it was a handwritten paper made by Irish political prisoners aboard the Hougoumont, which was a ship that had sailed from England to Wallioop, which is Fremantle in Western Australia. So the work kind of reflects on these ties between Ireland and Australia, colonial ties that we've not actually completely made sense of yet. Um, and throughout the work, it features voices from Anya and Kate in both countries, and they've also brought in other collaborators, including Ron Branfield Jr. and Patrick Stevens. Um, and I think this will be available on TULCA's podcast platforms when the festival begins as well. Another work that's part of the events program is Gam Talad by Susanna Bolton. So Susanna has contributed this collaboratively developed sound piece. So on the 13th of November at the O'Donoghue Centre, they'll lead this sort of devotional or ritual breathwork singing session along with their collaborators, Ellen MacDonald, Aileen Cormack, and Kayleen Lylde. That's an Irish name. I should know how to pronounce it. Um, so Susanna is an artist who is based in North Wisht, which is off the coast of Scotland, and they write these poetic texts that move between Scots Gaelic and English. Um, and in this work is developed through the sort of meditative, deep listening process at different locks, and it reflects on the feeling of floating, the feeling of being between worlds while at the lock, and social networks and friendships. And it will be a really, really beautiful session, as well as leading the singing themselves. They'll also lead the audience in certain types of singing too. So, yes, so it'll incorporate collective breathing and a short choral exercise. So the exhibition also unfolds across multiple locations as well. So there's all the sites I mentioned in Galway, but then there's also a satellite exhibition site in New York. Um, so this is a painting by the artist Peter Tresson, who is an Irish artist based in New York. Sorry, talking very fast. So Peter's paintings, like this one, they depict these solitary figures in kind of like strange, imagined spaces. So for TULCA, Peter will present The Longest Shadow Ever Cast, which is a diptych and a film work that links Galway and New York. So the diptych features this figure emerging from the ocean, and the upper panel is oil painted on linen, and the lower panel is a charcoal acrylic spray paint. The second half, which is the bottom half of this figure, and the top half of the tool panel will show in New York. And the paintings will be sort of aligned so that they meet on that latitudinal line that connect the two countries. Peter has also organized an exhibition and showcase, so where his work is, where the second half of the paintings show in New York. There will also be 3 local artists showing work there, as well as some other TULCA artists showing work in 334 Broomfield Gallery in New York. And the work shown there will kind of connect this idea about memory and migration and diaspora. So lastly, we also have a program on the Flirt FM on the airwaves. So this is an image of Bint Mbara. Bint is a sound researcher, and Bint's work is focused on water in Palestine. So throughout her work, she draws these parallels between the water waves and the sound waves and explores kind of border dissolution, so dissolving borders between bodies and states and tenses. And also this experience of being enveloped by sound, like you might be enveloped in water. She challenges settler colonial ways of knowing by taking seriously Palestinian practices, from rain summoning music to shrine pilgrimages, and seeing them as a catalyst for political imagination or resistance. So Bint will share the project title Memory. So this is a project that explores the flow of information across time, and it layers sounds, it layers histories, and it also highlights the politics of memory. So which narratives are allowed to be remembered, and which narratives are suppressed. So Bint's work will broadcast on Flirt FM on the 13th and the 20th of November. So from 6 to 8 p.m. So that is a very quick zoom through of the festival. That's all the artists involved, and yeah, a kind of nutshell of the themes. There's quite a lot there, so I wanted to keep it minimal, so I wasn't talking for too long, and there's time for questions. Yeah, thank you.